Welcome to the news for the week of 16 February. It's rolling right on by. Quantum crypto chaos, IBM Cloud Vulnerabilities and CICS, crowded Flounder, and hacking back. Turkish rats and Julian Assange, all this, and Jason Wood is here to deliver expert commentary about malware and HTTPS. All this and more on Security Weekly News today.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV courses live and on demand, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Team subscriptions include Pro Portal, so managers have full control over your team's training schedule. Go to itpro.tv/hack-naked and use the code HN30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the countless ways our critical systems can be put in jeopardy. Ransomware attacks, misconfiguration, user error, and malicious threat actors, to name a few. As IT infrastructures continue to grow and diversify, how do you ensure stable security? Core Security, a help systems company, provides an analytics-driven, layered approach to security with a portfolio that enables both proactive and reactive responses. With Core Security, you can reduce risk by limiting access, detect upcoming and active threats, test for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitor data for actionable insights. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/core security.
Welcome to the Security News. I'm your host, Doug White, often mispronouncer of Julian Assange. I probably mispronounced it again. I have some kind of, disability involving vowels or something like that. So tough, I could mispronounce. My name gets mispronounced all the time. Which is weird because I have a really simple name, but people are all the time going, is it Huita? Huita? I'm like, white, white. But anyway. All right, let's get to the news. Chaos may be the secret to beating quantum crypto crackers. Alliteration made simple. In the world of crypto, the one-time pad was always the gold standard. So forever and ever, the ideal of crypto was that you use a one-time pad. And basically, one-time pads were a cipher that was only used one time and then was discarded. So all the military spy organizations forever basically had groups of people that sat around and made these things. I think Jeff Mann may have been one of them. But that was probably before they had electric lights. But basically, these people sat around and they made these one-time pads that could be used by spy organizations, and they shipped them out in bags and things to get them wherever they needed to be. But computers meant that we needed crypto that was fast, that was bigger, and so we basically went in and we won't get into a whole discussion of crypto, but when we started hearing about quantum computers, basically quantum, according to the marketing people, meant that we could probably crack most of the crypto methods that were out there because theoretically we can crack anything if we have enough time, and that's pretty much true. And time's not a good term. It's probably better to say cycles, because if we have enough cycles, we can crack anything. Quantum changed that game, and suddenly there was a huge issue. Well, this paper, and it is a paper. I hate to tell you, it's an academic paper. I did put a summary on it if you don't want to read the academic paper. But basically, they were using the Vernum cipher, which is this very big piece of math, and they wanted to find a way to create a perfect secret. So this is something that just can't be cracked. So essentially a one-time pad. And what they did to do this was they put a photon generator on either end of a light cable, and they created a huge key. Basically, in order to create this perfect cipher, you need a key that's as long as the message. It needs to be a single-use key that is not related to the next key, and the key is private. So it has all these strictures around it that are not going to work in the real world unless you have some kind of mechanism. So the paper is actually about the mechanism and how they actually generated these photons, and by predicting what the photons were or something like that, they were able to actually exchange things ciphered using this photon-based system. So it's quite an interesting protocol that could actually maybe expand to be a communications protocol someday. So if you could actually use these same mechanisms, you could just encrypt everything in perfect ciphers, and then you don't have to worry about quantum computers. I did put the paper and a summary of the paper in the show notes, so you can read either one of those as you like. IBM reported a large list of vulnerabilities that could affect their cloud services. Most of those vulnerabilities are based in Java. They're Java SDK problems, they're Java problems. A lot of them have been around a long time, but I did want to point out that they did have a CICS vulnerability on their CICS TX cloud that was addressed in this bulletin on an old vulnerability, but they did start posting some fixes and patches and workarounds for some of these very large list of vulnerabilities on IBM systems in Java. So if you're using those, you might want to check that out. It's unusual to see governments actually say the name of a country that was responsible for anything. In my OMB hack letter that I got several years ago from the OMB hack, it basically said that my top secret information had been, and I don't have that credential anymore, but I couldn't tell you if I did. So maybe I do and maybe I don't. I don't know. But if I told you, I'd have to come looking for you. But I just said that an unknown third party, which might be a country or something like that, had stolen my information. So I was kind of worried when I went to the country that was probably responsible for stealing it, but regardless. But on Valentine's Day, U.S. Cyber Command Malware Alert account tweeted blame for North Korea for Hoplite, Bistro Math, Slick Shoes, Hot Croissant, I love the names of these, Artful Pie, Buffet Line, I guess it could be Buffett Line, maybe it's some, I don't know, and Crowded Flounder, my favorite of all. North Korea, incidentally, is nicknamed Hidden Cobra, so it all sounds like a bad movie plot. But, I'm going to name my next cat Crowded Flounder without a doubt. I was going to name it Electors of Voidka, but which is a cool train stop in Moscow, but Crowded Flounder really won that one out. So I did post a link to Crowded Flounder if you're interested in how that piece of malware actually works. In the UK, at the same time, the Attorney General stated that they're going to start naming and shaming foreign states that are hiring hackers to carry out attacks and or interfere in national elections. So that was kind of an interesting flip there. A lot of governments had in the past, including the U.S., had basically said bad things about hacking back, but and or addressing these kind of problems because it does tend to create international incidents. But I guess if they're only blaming people like North Korea, they're not too worried. At the same time as that, the UK did just release a huge review of their cybercrime law, which is called the Computer Misuse Act. And the U.S. is apparently considering allowing hacking back at this. In that same article, they said something about the U.S. considering changing their laws to allow hacking back. Currently, hacking back is illegal. Maybe. Most people think that it is. Most people discourage this approach, even though I've talked about it before, talked about it being an old school kind of thing. But England seems to be taking a more aggressive stance on this kind of thing. Others may follow suit, so, who knows. A hacking group known as APTC-23 apparently used pictures of young girls to lure Israeli soldiers to download chat apps that were actually malware. That group is associated with Hamas. We always hear reports on phishing, and I don't know how you teach people to stop clicking on links, because phishing people will always figure out what it is you want to click on, and when they figure out what you want to click on, they will get someone to click on it. The Turkish RAT phishing campaign, which was already out there, this Turkish RAT was a framework that had been around for a while, but now it has evolved to include this Adwind RAT. And Adwind is another multi-platform malware which exfiltrates data and sends it to the command and control server. It also can set up listening ports for remote addresses. And like all of these kind of frameworks, basically it starts with a phishing spam. It has a flexible framework backend that can be modified very quickly. Those frameworks are obfuscated. I hate the word, but it comes up all the time. They're obfuscated, so they're hard to analyze, and they're hard to detect because they're always shifting. And a lot of times this obfuscation is actually generated on the fly when they compile it. And because they're building them custom for people, they're very, very difficult to get signatures for. I thought this was a really good article that dissected that whole piece of malware and pulled all the pieces of it out, including the obfuscation of it, so you can take a look at that. Another piece of interesting phishing that was going on was this pay up or we'll make Google ban your ads kind of thing. Basically, this was an extortion scam. And they went out and said, if you don't pay them $5,000 in Bitcoin, they will use their botnets to flood your site with a huge amount of direct, and I'm quoting them, of direct bot-generated web traffic with 100% bounce ratio and thousands of IPs in rotation. So I guess they hired a marketing company to write their like headline, or to write the letter that they were sending out. Very fluffy and crazy sounding, but crazy, it just might work. The demand then basically doesn't appear to be a valid threat. This tactic could easily be used to generate revenue off of Google. And Google is pretty good about detecting people trying to manipulate AdSense, because I'm sure it's been tried many times to use bots to just click. They detect this thing and shut it down. So the threat that they're making about their bouncing bots or whatever, their bounce ratio from their bots, and I do know what it means, but the bounce ratio from their bots is probably not very realistic in terms of actually affecting Google. Two Australian ministers of parliament flew to London trying to prevent, and I'm going to try to say it, Julian Assange. I don't know if I said it right, but whatever. I've read his name a million times, but I've never met him, so I don't know. He didn't correct me if I get to meet him in prison. But they're trying to prevent him from being extradited to the United States. Assange is in prison in the UK. But he's under indictment in the United States on 18 charges that were related to espionage, because back in 2010, I think it was 2010, he released a bunch of classified military videos and other documents to the public through WikiLeaks. And all these charges were related to a 2007 video that I did put a link to on there, of a helicopter attack in Iraq by U.S. forces that Assange released through WikiLeaks. And there was a lot of controversy about this video. The military then immediately basically said, okay, we're coming for you. You want to play these games. So he is under indictment. His father and several other groups in the UK said that he would basically be given a death sentence if he was extradited. Whole big row. But anyway, they're trying to get the trial actually withdrawn, which means that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson would just actually withdraw this trial, and they wouldn't hold the extradition hearing. So who knows where that will go. But with that, we will welcome Jason Wood, who has expert commentary on malware and HTTPS, when we return.
The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome back to the Security News, and now we welcome Jason Wood to join us to talk about malware in HTTPS. Jason, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm okay, if I can pronounce everybody's name correctly, which sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't.
Well, today, like you said, we're going to be talking about HTTPS and malware, and this is from the Naked Security blog by Sophos, where I originally found this, and I decided, maybe there's something to talk about here to discuss with our listeners. I kind of enjoyed the headline of this blog post. It was Malware and HTTPS, a growing love affair. Must be a Valentine's Day thing or something like that. I'm not sure. But we've talked a number of times on the podcast about browsers and how they are encouraging, and I use encouraging in quotes here a little bit, sites to use HTTPS. And they're doing that by getting kind of aggressive about marking things as insecure now, particularly in Chrome, if a site uses HTTP. that provides incentive for website owners, of course, to switch over to HTTPS, because average users are going to look at insecure and think, oh my goodness, I could get hacked just by viewing this site. It's a little more complex than that, right? But nonetheless, it provides some security improvements, privacy enhancements, things like that, at least for interception of data going across the wire. And through that obscurity, malware authors have decided, hey, you know what, if that's good for the regular users, maybe that's good for us as well. And so now we're seeing a trend of more malware using HTTPS for its communication, whether that's exfiltrating data, command and control, things like that. The Naked Security blog, like I said, had the article on this. They also released a report that went about or discussed their analysis of malware that's out there. The basic gist of it, again, is that HTTPS is the use of HTTPS is on the rise for malware. According to Sophos, roughly 23% at this point of all malware is now using encrypted HTTP traffic. This has an obvious impact on us if we are depending on security monitoring tools that are looking at network traffic, depending on it being unencrypted to perform its analysis. So, it's going to impact the tools we use to perform analysis and capture of traffic. As a result, we need to make some changes or start to adapt and make some preparation for this trend so that we don't find ourselves coming up blind to activity that's occurring inside of our environment. So, it's kind of this continued process of, as adversaries change, in this case, malware authors, change their tactics, we need to look at changing what we're doing to make sure that we're appropriately monitoring. It's obviously not going to be acceptable to go before our managers and say, well, yeah, we just didn't see that because we hung on to our network IDS that only alerts on unencrypted traffic. And so, yeah, we just couldn't see what was happening using HTTPS. So, for example, like I said, network IDS, that was one of the first security tools that I implemented and used to monitor my environment when I was fairly new sysadmin. And it was great. I captured a ton of information. But now, because of encryption, that data is obviously going to be less rich. Now, does that mean that I should no longer use a network IDS or other network security tools? And the answer for me is no, I don't believe so, because I can still get valuable information out of those tools. But, I can't, I'm going to be limited on the content that I can capture. I can go ahead and do analysis, though, on things like who's talking to who, what ports are they using, through other capture of logging information. I can look at DNS queries that are hitting my DNS server and things like that, and then correlate that information together. But I'll obviously have to do some adjustment with my tool set to make that happen. We'll need to look at things potentially as endpoint security tools, which, full disclosure, I work at CrowdStrike, which does that. But, that's something for us to consider, whatever it is you use. DNS monitoring, things like that are all going to become more important as encryption comes into play. Right now, honestly, I find most of my analysis focuses on actual behavior of execution patterns and, what process kicked off, what caused it to kick off, what sub-processes or child processes were started because of that, what files were written to disk. That kind of behavior is where I find a lot of my analysis occurring. But then I always want to go back to network data and see where, again, who's talking to who and how did they do this. One thing to keep a note, or one thing to keep in mind as we are thinking about this, right now we're in kind of a transition state. Yes, we've got 23% of malware that is now using HTTPS. That is a rise, but that still means that there is 77% of malware out there using HTTP. So we need, we've got some time here. We obviously have things we can still monitor for and capture a lot of content on and capture payloads. But there's still a lot of work for us to do and information to be cleaned. One of the things that's kind of interesting, and Doug and I were just talking about this before the show, is that because malware is still primarily at this point using HTTP, and more sites are using HTTPS, just the fact that something is using unencrypted HTTP is actually kind of an indicator that maybe this is something that should be investigated further. But still, we need to start making some preparations. What can you do in your environment to enhance your security monitoring to cope with this? Now, there are some things that we could look at doing, such as implementing proxy servers and having those proxy servers terminate all HTTPS sessions and then reinitiate them out to the destination web server. And that's certainly one thing we can consider. We can perform inspection on that traffic there as it's running across the proxy server. But there are things we also need to keep in mind with that. One, we had to have to set up a PKI infrastructure, set up the certificate, authority certificate that we put on that proxy server will be recognized by all of our devices and systems and things like that. So that's something we would need to think about. But there's also privacy and legal ramifications that we need to keep in mind with that type of inspection. You could find yourself capturing and analyzing people's banking data, and people would get very excited about that and upset with us. If you go down that path, you need to not only handle the technical side of things, of network performance, of decrypting and re-encrypting everything and pouring all this analysis before you let it go by, but you also need to talk with your legal department and HR and make sure that you are capturing the right information and that you're getting proper authorization for it. You don't want to implement this kind of behind the scenes and then get blamed later for looking at people's bank accounts, for example, or decrypting whatever traffic that they're worried about. So yeah, save yourself some time and grief there by we're making sure you're getting all of the authorization and determining what you want to capture and monitor. There are definitely tools out there that can help us deal with this change of the migration to HTTPS. If someone says that we're all doomed because malware is going to use encryption or bad guys are using encryption or whatever it is about encryption, that's really not correct. There are other tools that we can use. Yes, it will impact the data we can capture. Yes, it will limit us on data that we might like to capture. However, there are other things we can still do to determine whether or not something is malicious or not. The key thing here for us, though, as defenders, is to make sure that we are able to continue performing effective monitoring, that we're staying ahead of that curve so that all of a sudden we don't find ourselves going completely dark. So in this transition state, my recommendation is start thinking about this now. What are we going to do to deal with encryption of malware? How are we going to detect it? Are we depending solely on unencrypted network traffic? And if so, then how are we going to adapt and prepare? Much better to do that now than wait until we have a malware outbreak that we have to then go to management and say, yeah, we couldn't detect it because we didn't think ahead far enough to see that this was coming. So interesting read. Go ahead and take a quick look at it. It's not very long. And then just start evaluating your defenses based on the changes that are occurring.
I think thanks, Jason. I think that's an excellent idea. I think we all too often wait until something forces us to do things, but that one's coming, and it's easy enough to do. The bandwidth is there, and pretty soon you're going to be seeing more and more of this stuff. I mean, why not? If you're doing malware using command and control servers, they're already making huge efforts to hide what they're doing. And then as they add these frameworks and they're literally going to many command and control servers, why not encrypt the traffic as well? I mean, it makes it even harder for analysts to see what's happening. So figure out what to do there. But also, as Jason said, be careful at your borders. If you start sniffing all your own traffic, you can get in trouble real fast. So be careful about that, depending on your locale and what the law says. Thanks, Jason. Finally, Ben Zhao, a computer science professor at the University of Chicago, along with his wife, Heather Chung, also a computer science professor at the University of Chicago. You don't ever want to get multiple computer science professors together. It just can get weird. But they basically developed this bracelet that will jam an echo. And so the bracelet looks like it was about the size of like one of those personal pan pizza pans. So it wasn't exactly fashionable, and it didn't really look like something you'd want to wear to bed. And I don't really know why you have to wear it. It seems like it would be easier just to sort of, set it on the table. Apparently, it jams echo and prevents the snooping that echo. And I'm not saying her name because it'll wake everybody's up. But apparently, it prevents that from snooping on you. It seemed a lot easier to me that it would be faster and simpler just to drill an arm-sized hole in the Echo and wear that instead of the bracelet. But, whatever turns you on. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Security Weekly News. I'll be back on Friday with the Security Weekly News wrap-up. Thanks for tuning in. See you then.